The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual participants and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any organization. The participants are expressing their personal opinions and perspectives. Today, we are going to cover the topic that might be controversial to some and may be absolute no-brainer to some other people, which is eradication of invasive species from islands. We're going to talk about Project LIFE Raft on Rathlin Island, and we're going to dive into all the good, the bad, the ugly. And of course, folks, this is Conservation and Science podcast, where we take a deep dive on topics of ecology, conservation, and human-wildlife interactions. And I'm Tommy Serafinski. I always strive to bring you diverse perspectives on environmental stories, and that means that you might hear the stories and you may hear the views and opinions on this podcast that you might not necessarily agree with. And that's okay, because we need more dialogue and understanding and less division and fighting. In other words, I want you to listen to people you may not have to listen to otherwise. So anyway, our guest today, Dr. David Tosh. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, absolutely. The first time we met, probably a year ago, on an All-Ireland Mammal Conference, and you were giving a talk about this eradication project. Listen, give us like a 10,000 feet view of what is LIFE Raft project on Rathlin and why it is so unique.
Well, the LIFE Raft project is something that has been talked about and thought about for at least 20 years now. But it wasn't until, I think it was 2022, that funding was received from EU LIFE and additional sources to fund a 5-year project to eradicate ferrets, feral ferrets and brown rats from Rathlin Island. So Rathlin Island, it's the only populated island off the coast of Northern Ireland. It is a population of around about 160 people. But it is also home to some of Northern Ireland's most internationally and nationally important seabird colonies. So the feral ferrets were introduced to Rathlin in the 1980s. They were introduced as a response by locals in the island who were struggling to control the rabbit population. So they thought they'd introduce ferrets. So they got some from the mainland and brought them to the island. And unfortunately, following that introduction, we saw an anecdotal decline in ground nesting birds on the wider island. So, yeah, there was a lot of enthusiasm for removing the ferrets as a predator of ground nesting birds, because as I'm sure you know, and your listeners know as well, ground nesting birds, particularly in Britain and Ireland, are under a lot of pressures and are not doing well. So, because Rathlin Island's, over 4 kilometres away from the mainland, it was quite difficult for recolonisation of invasive species like the brown rat. So it was deemed as feasible as undertaking this project. So yeah, the project started in 2020. Well, I joined the project, I think, in 2022, and the ferret eradication began in October 2023. Now, in addition to the eradication of the ferrets, big part of the project is eradicating brown rats from the island. So the exact timing of their arrival on Rathlin is unknown. It's assumed that they arrived on Rathlin similar to the same time that the species arrived on the island of Ireland. So we're talking something within the past 400 years. So not that long. It's likely they were introduced to the island via a shipwreck. The island itself is littered with the skeletons of ships and all around the coastline and the seas. So it's assumed, but to be honest, we'll never really know how they got there. Now, the project itself is quite unique because it's targeting 2 species at the same time using different methods. Now, if Rathlin was in New Zealand, you'd probably be allowed to go about and apply poisons via helicopters, and you would get rid of your problem species that way. Fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the poisons that are typically used in that way are only licensed for use against rodents in the UK and Ireland. So we were never going to get permission to use poisons to get rid of ferrets. So for the first part of the project, eradicating ferrets, we decided on a trapping approach. So we used a mixture of live traps and kill traps. And then for the rat operation, it was a standard use of anticoagulant rodenticides. So that is something that's been repeated hundreds of times on inhabited and uninhabited islands across the world. Well, the ferret eradication, it was the first time an attempt had been made to eradicate feral ferrets. There are a number of locations around the world where they do occur on islands. So like the Channel Islands, they're a bit of a problem. Some of the Spanish islands, and obviously across New Zealand, feral ferrets are one of the big species that they want to eradicate as part of the 2050 campaign. So
what was the story with the rabbits? Why they had the problems with the rabbits? And first, let's start first. Like, was that successful? Did ferrets get rid of rabbits?
No, it didn't. So I think they've probably suppressed them a little bit, but it didn't get rid of the rabbit problem. Depending on the information you look at, there is evidence that from, I think it's Australia and New Zealand, that rabbit numbers control ferret numbers rather than the other way around. So I think they probably found some sort of balance. And
yeah, right. This
on
is the thing. That is it top down or bottom up? Because the number of it's often, even when we hear things like, oh, you need to introduce lynx and wolves to deal with the deer, and outside of all the other problems why this wouldn't work, there's also like, are you sure which species controls which species numbers really? Because it's like could be other.
Yeah, no. Absolutely. I mean, to be honest, there's not a huge amount of information there in relation to ferrets and rabbits. But what information we found, it seemed to suggest that it was the rabbits that would control. But I mean, the people that introduced the ferrets didn't know that, and like a lot of biological control methods, it was well intentioned. The rabbits were causing a problem. Forage is a problem on the island because it's an Atlantic coastal island. It's not great for farming in the first place. So when you've got an additional grazer competing with getting to high numbers and competing with your sheep and your cattle, it is a bit of an issue. So I can understand why it was done. I mean, I don't think hindsight's a wonderful thing. I don't think at the time we could have imagined that was going to be the outcome.
Right. It is always easy to, retrospectively in 21st century, if all the build-up knowledge rolled in and said, like, oh, they should or shouldn't. Right. Yeah. But they were different times and they were different people. They were dealing with the different problems that you probably couldn't even imagine. I mean, the people who are offering those opinions, what they should and shouldn't do.
Absolutely. I mean, to be honest, island communities are quite self-sufficient. So they're used to finding solutions to problems. So, that was, as far as they could see, that was a solution that, a potential solution to deal with their problem. So they did it. And I can understand that, having spent, a bit of time living on an island community now. I've got a bit of a better understanding. So time is a wonderful thing. So
listen, David, I want you to paint us a picture, like when you joined the project, like what was the scale of impact of ferrets and rats on the island?
That's one thing. It's difficult to quantify the exact impact. I mean, we'd seen a lot of our information on the occurrence of a lot of the ground nesting birds like lapwing curlew and your ground nesting seabirds as well. It was largely from information that was collected by local people on the island. So we're talking about historical memory of particular species being in particular locations and how they'd noticed over time that these things had changed. It wasn't until I think the early 2000s that there was the first efforts to understand the potential impacts of the ferrets on the island. And as far as I'm aware, there'd been no efforts to try and quantify the damage that brown rats were causing on the island. However, prior to us starting the eradication of the ferrets and the rats in the island, we did undertake monitoring at night. So it was really interesting to go down to the coastal areas, the seabird colonies at night with thermal imaging cameras and see the coastline come alive with rats. So I think the greatest impact in the seabirds colonies when we were there on the island was likely from the rats. Okay, I think that from information we were able to gather, the ferrets were more of an inland species. They didn't impact the coastal seabird colonies as much as the rats did. I think the impact of the ferrets was most likely historical. So when they first arrived on the island and you still had the ground nesting birds in the majority of the farmland, they would have had the greatest impact on them and probably forced the remaining birds to utilise the coastal areas where it was more difficult for the ferrets to go. Unfortunately, those coastal areas are where the rats, thrive. So direct impact whenever we undertook the ferret eradication was probably limited. It was more like an indirect effect, whereby, the presence of the ferrets was preventing the species from nesting where they had traditionally on the island. So rats, the evidence is there from right across the world of the impact of rats on ground nesting birds and particularly
seabirds. So for people who listening to this for the first time and maybe they have no idea what rats are like, how rats are impacting ground nesting birds, what are they doing? Because ferret is like, most people will understand, like, okay, these are predatory animals, they predate on birds, on youngs and so on. But rats, what are they doing to those birds?
It's exactly the same. They're predating the eggs. They're probably predating chicks as well. They're causing a pressure on the birds. Now these birds, they're long lived. They typically only have one egg. So if you've got something coming along and eating your sole chick for that year, it's going to have an impact on the long term survival of those species. So I think it was just the sheer size of the colonies and the protection, the remoteness of it gave in some locations, prevented the rats from completely decimating the populations there. So it's the impact that the rats have is exactly the same as what the ferrets would have had originally, is direct predation, probably of eggs and chicks.
Yeah, even though rats are not like carnivorous, they're just omnivores. They're just gonna opportunistically feed on anything they find.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so we would monitor when we were there as well. We monitored the coastline for additional food resources that might wash up and make the rat eradication problematic. And seal carcasses would often wash up, and rats were consuming those. I mean, there's no doubt they were eating lots of different things that were getting washed up. So, they make the most of what resources are available to them where they are, and depending on the time of year. Just so happens, Rathlin's bird population swells massively in the summertime. So it's a resource that they're not going to ignore, and they're going to make the most of. So
maybe let's jump ahead a little bit. And I don't know if you're in a position to say whether project was successful or wasn't. What I remember is that you were waiting for 2 consecutive seasons with no recorded ferrets. I don't remember now whether it was ferrets and rats or both. And tell us, I think it was actually October 25 when it's supposed to be like a final. So just tell us like whether you can or cannot say whether project was successful, and how does that work? What is a success criteria?
Yeah, well, I can't tell you whether it's been successful or not because I no longer work on the project. And if I did that, I'm sure that RSPB would be knocking on my door and asking to have questions with me. So, so all I can say is that when we started the ferret eradication, so we started that in October, the trapping operation, and I think the last animal that we saw was towards the end of October 23. And as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been a ferret seen on the island since that point. Now, because this was the first attempt to eradicate ferrets globally, there is no standard. So I think when we spoke, I probably would have said that there's an international standard for brown rat eradication. So essentially it's 2 breeding seasons. If you find no evidence after extensive monitoring that there's the high likelihood you've been successful with the rat eradication. So we kind of used that as a basis for the approach for the ferret eradication as well. So since I left the project, the team there have continued to monitor the island using camera traps and various other means to see if there's ferrets on the island. So there's a high likelihood that the ferret eradication has been successful, but that will be officially announced, I imagine, relatively soon. In relation to the rats, I was involved in preparation work for that work going underway, but I wasn't responsible for the rat eradication at the time. But as far as I understand, things are looking good. Poisons were put down, I think in October last year for the winter period. And as far as I understand, take and everything like that of bait was as expected. So it's now down to monitoring on the project. So that'll have to go on for a period of time before they can confidently say that there aren't any more rats on the island.
So is it much longer, as for I'm getting from is much longer time taken up in the project on actual monitoring than the active eradication? Because I presume like initially you'll get the bulk of them and then you basically looking for onesie twosies, and the whole thing is like, did I miss one?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the big, you probably, with these sort of programs, you usually start off really quickly, catch a lot of animals, kill a lot of animals, and then it's a slow tail to try and, that you're chasing, as you say, the small number of individuals that are left in the landscape. Now, again, there's lots of good information for brown rat eradication, so we can see if particular bait take behaviour was being seen in the rats on Rathlin. You could look to the literature from elsewhere in the world to see if that was normal or whether something unusual was happening. With the ferrets, we were flying blind. We were making it up as we went along because there is no guidance. So you're just using, your knowledge of the species ecology and the landscape to respond in a particular way. So monitoring is really difficult to prove that something is not in a landscape. So that is where the majority of the project is focused on. Monitoring is key. And so is like subsequent biosecurity, trying to prevent reinvasion by these animals. They're not the showy bits and the elements of projects like these that people focus on, but they are arguably the most important thing in relation to the investment of huge amount of time and money in these projects, because they're not cheap. It's not, you can't undertake these and go, sure, we'll get another 2, 3, 4, 5 million in a couple of years if it goes wrong. You've got to be as confident as you can be in your action that you're going to be successful, because it's at the end of the day, it's other people's money you're playing with, and there's a lot of risk associated with it.
Yeah. Can you tell us how many people, like how big was the team involved in it? And because people hear €5 million, £5 million, And it's like, well, my God, they're making huge money on this, because surely there's no way in hell they're spending all of that on a couple of traps, right? You're just going to buy a couple of traps. They're 20 quid a piece. And the rest of it, so tell us, like, how big is the team and why those projects are so expensive?
Yeah, I mean, the reason these projects are so expensive are for two reasons. One, the number of people you have to employ in the project, and two, because of the remoteness of the locations that you work in. So Rathlin's not the most extreme, because there is a ferry service, a daily ferry service that connects with the mainland. But the majority of these sort of projects have been undertaken in far-flung locations. But yeah, the costs, I mean, so in relation to the ferret project, so there was, how many members of staff? So we had, I think, 4 members of staff that were working with the community. So for me, that was one of the key elements of the project, because without the community, the project would not have been successful. So we needed to ensure we tried to communicate as best we could with them about what we were doing, addressing any concerns that they have and things like that. So there was 4 members in that part of the team. There was myself, a ferret trapping team leader, and then there was 1, 2, 3, 4 ferret trappers. Okay, so there was when we started the ferret trapping itself, there was myself, the team leader, the 4 ferret trappers, and we got 2 of the bird monitoring team involved in the project initially, because we decided to take an approach where we put traps all over the island. So we had over 400 traps operated on the island. Now, typically, when you're managing a group of traps, you can only realistically check 20 per person per day. So with the number of people we had in the project and could recruit on the project, there was no way we were going to be able to individually check the traps. So we ended up developing a wireless network on the island using LoRaWAN. Now, some of your listeners may be more familiar with trap monitoring devices like Mink Police, which is a little device that has a SIM card that you attach to your trap. And basically, whenever the door closes, it sends a signal to say, the door's closed, come and check me. Now, we didn't have that luxury in Rathlin because the mobile signal was pants. So we had to develop our own wireless network. So we modified sensors that were used on doors and attached them to the traps. And we worked with a small business outside of Belfast that works with this technology, and we developed with them like a platform to manage the traps, and they helped us install like solar powered antenna across the island so we could get could check in with the traps and things like that. So we took an all island approach. So we opened the traps as quickly as we possibly could. We didn't want to do what they call a rolling front is. So maybe where you start at one end of the island, slowly open the traps, stay in that area until you're confident that you've got most of the animals, and then you move into the next section of the island, open up those traps. So that would be a rolling front approach. We didn't want to do it because we felt it'd be more difficult to manage over the period of time that we had. So we decided on using technology to support an all island attack, and that's essentially what we did. And it was people look at these things, these projects, and say, how can they cost so much? It's like you are paying for full-time employment of quite a number of individuals. When it comes to rat eradications, we were talking of about 30 members of staff, and that's not cheap. That's not cheap. That's why a lot of these projects have historically relied on volunteers to keep costs down. Now, there was an element of that with the project, but we tried to ensure that, people were paid as much as possible, because it's a tough job to ask people to do. Going out to an Atlantic island in the middle of winter, expected to go out in all conditions, it's not for everybody, and it is tough.
So maybe that's a good moment to ask the question: how does the day of the ferret trapper look like? An average day of a ferret trapper?
So it changed as the project developed. So as you can imagine, so before we started trapping, obviously we had to set the traps out. Myself and the head trapper, we coordinated where the traps would go out, what kind of traps would go out, because we only use live traps around people's houses, because local people were concerned about their cats going into traps and getting injured. So we, prior to anything happening, we tagged some of the cats to see where they would move. We looked for them on the cameras to see how far they moved, to give us an idea of where was safe to put the kill traps for the ferrets and where wasn't safe for the kill traps. So there was a lot of planning that went into it. So over the summer, the traps were put out across the island. We dealt with issues that arose at the time, working out how to prevent the cows from interfering with the traps, because they're quite inquisitive beasts. So I don't think we ever got to the bottom of a brilliant solution to stop cows, but it certainly took up a lot of our time trying to find a way to stop them from eating the antennas on our traps. But so there was a lot of putting the traps out in the landscape, testing particular approaches. We had a 3-week period of pre-baiting before the traps started. So that's like putting the baits in the traps and wiring the traps open so the animals get used to them. And then when the trapping started, a typical day was me getting up at stupid o'clock in the morning, looking to see what traps had been triggered, and assigning the traps to the different members of the trapping team. So I would start off in the office, and then we'd go up to our shed. We had a great shed on the island that had all our resources, and we'd meet there to allocate everybody's route for that day. So in the beginning, it was pretty tough going, because we had to deal with us learning about the technology. So we had issues with the technology that we eventually, with experience, we resolved. But my days would probably start about 6 o'clock, and I could be working till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock that evening easily. The guys were restricted in when they could go out due to daylight hours. But for me and some of the team, work continued. Started early in the morning and continued into the evening as we tried to make sense of the information we were collecting, responding to any issues and things like that. So I deliberately made sure I was out in the field supporting the guys, checking the traps, because I think it's important for somebody like myself who's supposed to be managing this to understand, what the issues are when somebody says, this is a problem. And to be honest, at the beginning of the project, we needed all hands on deck because there was so many unknowns. But as the project went on, the amount of, as we worked out the kinks and issues with the technology and the system, the number of traps we had to check each day reduced massively. So the issue was as well, because we were using live traps and kill traps, because of legislation here, you essentially have to check the traps every 24-hour period if they've been triggered. So if a live trap had been triggered, we had to get to it as soon as we possibly could, to either release any non-target animals or humanely dispatch any ferrets that we caught. So, and then the humane dispatch method that we chose with feral ferrets was air rifle. So, it's not particularly pleasant, but it's quick. We worked with DERA vets over here to establish, what were the correct calibers, what was the correct poach to ensure that as a humane dispatch as possible. So again, a lot of work went into that. I mean, I think that's, these projects, they may, whenever they're successful, they may appear as like a social media post, a news article on a website, but that only represents a tiny, the end point. I mean, there's so much lead into projects like these. It's a massive logistical undertaking, and you've got to work with communities, you've got to work with different organisations, like gaining permission to access all land on Rathlin was a requirement for us to undertake the eradication. And we only got our final permission, maybe, was it a week before we were due to open the traps? So, yeah, it's a lot more stressful than
people
you can imagine.
People can imagine. Wow. And, you know, maybe now it's a good moment to talk about community, because you mentioned minutes ago, the importance of the community engagement. And I remember that was very important and a huge part of your talk as well, the importance of getting community on board to get a community support, because without that wouldn't work. And I specifically remember what you already said, that, you know, like the cats were the problem, where obviously my thought was like, well, surely those cats are not good for ground nesting birds either, get them too. But that wouldn't bode well with the... So would you mind just explaining to us, you know, like why it was so important, and what techniques, what methodology you employ to get people on board, and how does it look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose like most people that are interested in working in this sector, you know, we start off because we're interested in animals. But the longer I've been involved in this, the more I realise people are key to things working. The main thing that helped the project be successful with the local community was simply, one, being on the island. So I lived on the island. And two, speaking to people. As simple as that. Speaking to people, listening to concerns, taking concerns on board, and not just paying lip service. I mean, yes, there are like operational constraints. There's some things that you can't accommodate, but you know, you have to try and work with people as much as you possibly can. I mean, there's examples from across the world where projects like these have failed because the projects haven't engaged with the community that lives there, and it's their home. So it was evident early on in my conversations with the local people that there was a lot of concern about the impact of the project on the cats. So we had to address that, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, logistically, if we could have used the kill traps all across the island, it would have saved so much time. It would have saved so much hassle. But we couldn't ignore those concerns. So we had to adopt the live traps, increase the workload for us. But as I say, you've got to work with the people whose island, you know, whose home that you're working on. The project's essentially a flash in the pan. You know, it's there for a few years, it goes away, but those people have to live there for the rest of their lives, and we have to respect their wishes because we are visitors at the end of the day. So, so how did we address the cat issue? Well, first of all, there was concern that might have been a feral cat population on the island, because historically in the west of the island, people may have dumped kittens in the past, and there probably was a feral cat population. But we did a lot of camera trap monitoring, and you know, we went out at night, did surveys. So some of the bird surveyors were monitoring species at night anyway, so they were going out with the thermal cameras across the island and looking to see if they would record any signs of evidence of cats moving about. So, you know, again, it's really difficult to say that these things don't exist on the island, but we came away pretty confident after a bit of time that there wasn't a feral cat population on the island. So we had to try and understand how the domestic cat population used the island. So there was no feral cats, but there was domestic cats. Now, these could be cats that, in the world of cat science, there's lots of ways of classifying your cats. But we just, so there was a number of cats that were solely lived in the house and never left. Then there was cats, you know, that would go out each day and come back at night. And then there was cats that would go away for long periods of time and then come back to the house. But we just classed them all as, you know, we considered them the same. We treated them the same. So we tried to get as much information on where they moved about the island. So as I said, we put little collars on them, little GPS collars on them,
On all of them?
And we also, no, not on all of them, because again, not everybody consented to us doing that with their pets. So in the end, we pulled the information that we had, and we took the largest distance that the animals were moving and applied that buffer around each house with a cat. So that dictated where the live traps went. So we also made a cat catalogue of all the island's cats. So each of the trapping team had a little cat catalogue with them. So if they did catch a cat, then they could see whose cat it was, and then they would be notified if their cat was caught. We'd release it, and then let them know if their cat was caught, just so they could be checked upon. And we agreed with anybody that if any cat required veterinary treatment as a result of being in their traps, we would pay for it. We would arrange for travel to the mainland, put in the cattery, etc. So yeah, it was again, it may seem like quite a small element of the project, but it was quite an important element.
No, like you said, that is super important to get the people on board for the all the requirements that you had. You mentioned that if you could use kill traps, that would make your life much easier. Why? Is the process of dispatching or just checking the traps every 24 hours, was that such a time consuming?
Yeah, so the checking the live traps, it was very time consuming, but that was the approach that we took. So that was the effort we had to put into it. But the kill traps, so they were a DOC 250 trap, so Department of Conservation from New Zealand. They've developed a range of kill traps, spring kill traps. So we got permission to use them for the ferret eradication. Now, to be honest, going into the project, I wasn't a big fan of the idea of using them, but having managed like a hybrid project between live and kill traps, when it comes to the management of the traps and concern about animal welfare and things like that, it's just completely removed, because the way these traps have been extensively tested in New Zealand, and there's been a lot of work done put into how humane these are. Yes, they do kill an animal, but the death is instantaneous as far as I can see, because the sheer power of these is nothing to be messed with. So I had confidence in the kill traps that if any ferret went into it, it would be killed outright, and there was no need to immediately check a trap to check the condition or the welfare of the animal. So from managing a project like that, if you could operate only with kill traps, then it's probably an approach I would take instead of a hybrid approach or a fully live trap approach. Just purely logistics. But again, the kind of trap, the kind of setup that you do depends on the island that you're on. There's so many factors that can influence that. And we didn't start the project going, right, we're definitely using this. It was going into the project and saying, okay, what can we use? How can we use it? What are the circumstances that are unique to Rathlin to prevent us from doing this or that? Can we work around those issues? Can we find a solution? So it's it's incredibly complex. But just sheerly from managing, managing a network of traps, managing people, managing their welfare, having kill traps rather than live traps, and the condition that you need to check them every 24 hours, it just makes such a big difference. Because like our team's welfare was a big thing that we were concerned about, because these kind of projects do chew up people, and we were quite determined not to do that, because they just require it. They require a big commitment from you as an individual. You sacrifice your family life, your social life, your working silly hours. So, it's not conducive to, a brilliant, social and family life, but so we were quite determined. We weren't going to create the conditions where issues were going to occur and say people quitting and things like that. And thankfully, we were very fortunate that we didn't have anybody quitting the project. Everybody remained. in the ferret team. So that was quite unusual as well, I think, for these projects.
But that's actually a very good point, because you're sort of almost like on the deployment to the
Yeah.
island, and now you're fighting with ferrets essentially. Maybe
Yeah.
you're not gonna lose your life. Although you guys were deploying those traps in quite unusual, dangerous places, for what I remember.
Yeah. Well, as Rathlin is a sea island, it's got lots of cliffs, and the cliffs are things that we couldn't ignore. So another reason that the project was so expensive was health and safety considerations. So we undertook extensive work to map the best routes for climbing on the island, what approaches people could take. We looked at industrial climbing techniques, mountain climbing techniques, what was the best approach for the island. Now, Rathlin is not an island you want to climb on. The geology is all wrong for climbing, so it's an incredibly dangerous location.
Wait, in what sense? That the rock is brittle?
Yeah, it's very crumbly. So, if you go to... if you visit Rathlin over the winter or early spring, you'll see the evidence of rock falls all along the coastline. So the coast, the cliff faces are constantly changing. So it's not somewhere you'd do any recreational climbing. I mean, it was great fun. It was great to learn the techniques and get access to parts of the island that not many people have had the opportunity to. But it was an aspect to the project that took up a lot of time, effort, and money, because it's quite technical. So equipment, experts, qualified team, these things again aren't cheap. And because it's people may say, well, why do you need to do all that? And it's like, well, we were working for an organisation, and that organisation is bound by health and safety legislation. We can't just rock up and go, sure, we'll be grand. We'll be grand with a bit of blue nylon rope trapped around your waist. No, you can't do that in a working environment. So, a proper working environment like that. So we had to do everything that was required from us from a health and safety perspective. So,
but why you needed to do that in terms of why you needed to climb the rocks or the cliffs, why you needed to are those ferrets able to climb those cliffs and get there, or from that perspective?
Probably not, but so we had to make part of eradication projects. You have to make sure that you access all parts of the island or the location that you're going to take the work on. Every animal that has a home range in there must be exposed to your management measure. So there may be parts of the coastline. Rathlin, so the north side of the island, it had big sea cliffs. The farmland went up to the top of the cliffs, big sea cliffs, and at the bottom there was maybe a stretch of land between that and the beach, and it was those parts that we were really interested in targeting for the ferrets. So, in some parts of the island, yes, you could walk to particular locations and then take access from the top of the cliffs and take old paths down to the bottom. But in some ways, it wasn't realistic to carry material like traps, etc., from that point to there. So it was easier to actually go to the top of the cliff and drop down. Other parts of the island you couldn't safely access by a foot, so you had to go in by rope. So, I mean, it was more of the rope work was more of a concern for the rat operation, but it did allow us to test things out. So during the ferret phase, we could work things out, test things out that would inform the rat phase. So where it was much, much, much greater reliance on accessing cliffs, because the brown rats, they're running up and down the cliffs. So you have to be able to access them. Otherwise, it's a refuge, and there's no point in doing what you're setting out to do.
Exactly, it becomes a hotspot from which all the animals will then recolonize the island. Listen, one question that I still need to ask you is about the ethical aspects. You already mentioned that. And to some extent, that's probably something we could have started with this discussion. We could have started this podcast in any number of ways. So let's talk about it now. Obviously, there are people who are listening to this podcast, and they have very strong opinion that it's sort of like we're punishing animals for other people's mistakes, and that's bad. We shouldn't be doing that. So that would be probably extreme end of the spectrum. Then there are genuine animal welfare concerns, like you already said. So, for example, how am I going to dispatch the ferret, welfare of the animal, welfare of the bycatch animal in a trap, and so on and so forth. So tell me, like, were there any people on the island itself that were, oh no, we like those ferrets, or oh, you shouldn't be killing our ferrets, or anything like? So it's a very much open question, but I would just like you to address these ethical, the whole spectrum of ethical considerations in a project like that, where you're effectively killing animals.
Yeah, look, the community on Rathlin was as diverse as any community on the mainland. So there were people on the island that were completely ethically opposed to the killing. They understood to a point why we were doing it, but they didn't agree with what we were doing. I mean, you can't, in the short time of a project like this, you don't have the opportunity to change some of these opinions that have been held for a lifetime. And it'd be naive for us to assume that we could. So again, it was trying to keep speaking to these people, try and address their concerns as much as possible, but be aware that, you can't convince everybody. Like, you're never going to have, you want as much support as you possibly can for these projects. But I don't believe you will ever get 100% support for these projects within the communities that are impacted with them, or communities outside that are looking on what we're doing. I mean, addressing the ethics side of things, that was a massive element of what we were going to do. So we did originally look at the use of veterinary medicines to euthanize ferrets on the island, but we couldn't get permission to use veterinary medicines to euthanize any animals.
Oh, why?
So the people that are in control of those things wouldn't allow us to do it.
Freaking bureaucrats, huh?
Yeah, possibly. I don't know.
I know you can. You can on the record say.
I can only speculate to a point what the reasons were. I mean, to be honest, veterinary medicines, I imagine it comes down to veterinary medicines are controlled drugs, so they come under the misuse of drugs legislation. So they're highly regulated and controlled. So I imagine there was concerns about how we were going to store them safely, etc., on the island. It wasn't something that we felt we could address the issues that were raised, but it was chosen. So again, as I said, we came into the project not saying, okay, we're going to apply this method, and make it fit to the scenario. So we looked at the variety of options that were available to us. Because of the size of ferrets, it's not like a squirrel where, you're legally allowed to dispatch it with a blow to the head. The ferrets, fall on, they're just slightly larger than the size of animal that you're actually allowed to do that method of dispatch within the UK and Ireland. So we thought, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to take an approach that, where there's no opportunity of error. So we came down to two other options after that. So it was use of firearms or use of veterinary medicines. My preference would have been use of veterinary medicines, because firearms comes with its own considerations. But yeah, it was kind of forced upon us that we had to employ firearms. So once that was agreed, then we ended up hooking up with some of the veterinary team within the local Department of Agriculture to look at the caliber of weapon. Because again, there's when you're looking at projects like these, there's very little information that's specific to your circumstances. So there's not a lot of information out there on what is the correct bullet type to kill a ferret. So you have to you have to do what you can in those circumstances. And thankfully, we had access to ferret carcasses on the island. Local people, they would trap the ferrets. And because we were on the island, they were like, once they trapped them, it's like, here you go, you can have that. So we used those carcasses to test them.
So they were trapping themselves, the ferrets?
Yeah. But I mean, it was localized. It was like, in the farmyard or around the house or something like that. It wasn't extensively at the time we were on the island.
Because of the protection of chicken coops and stuff.
Yeah, because nobody could keep chickens or ducks or anything on the island while the ferrets were about. So not long after I started on the island, somebody had ducks and chickens, and it wasn't too long before the ferrets came along and got them. So, So ethics-wise, even the consideration of different approaches within the RSPB, there's an ethics committee. So every option we had to put forward to them, it was considered. That committee is independent. It's made up of, scientists, people wise in the ways of ethics, whoever they may be, and they would make judgment and comment on the things that we put forward. So it wasn't just a matter of turning up, we're going to do this. It was quite an involved process. So, but we just wanted to ensure what we were doing was a sound approach. It was informed by evidence. As a scientist, that's key. You want to have an informed approach, and where the information's not there, you extrapolate or you get that information. So that's what we did. So we wanted, the dispatch to be as humane as possible for the ferrets, and it was found that the 22 air rifle was more than enough to pretty much cause an instantaneous death with the ferret.
Was it a headshot?
Yeah, cranial dispatch. So,
David, I'm going to ask you a question that you probably, I don't know if you can or cannot answer the way you would like to. So people will look at you and listen to you and figure it out. But I'm going to ask a question anyway. Do you feel like there was a too much of the red tape? Because it feels to me like the project is difficult as it is. And it's just like, oh my God, everything that you mentioned, you need to make sure of this, and you cannot get the medicine because somebody will steal that medicine on the offshore island, and then this one, and then ethics committee and everything. It's like, oh my God, can you just get on with it and dispatch the ferrets? So it seems to me, or maybe that's really the question. Do you feel that sometimes it might be excessive, or maybe too much of a red tape that just inflates the cost and difficulty of such projects?
Yeah, I do. I can understand why it's there, but so these projects are not very common, particularly within Britain and Ireland. So organisations, institutions are not set up to manage these. They're set up to manage a business or management over the long term of a particular area or a particular species. Island eradications are incredibly unique situations that require, what they call adaptive management. So being able to be flexible to the circumstances that you're presented with. But a lot of, our institutions, organizations are not flexible, particularly when they're big. And it's something that we did struggle with internally within the organization that I worked for, that I won't mention. We did struggle because the systems were not set up for the kind of project that we were. And that did create issues. It created a lot of extra work for us. But at the same time, as I say, I can understand why those things are in place. You could do all sorts of things, but you do need some sort of control if you know, and a documentation process and things like that, because historically these projects have occurred on a lot of islands around the world, but the documentation and recording that went on has been very poor. So one of the big things that we wanted to do with this project is ensure that we're recording every step, every process, so that there is, publicly available data that can help the next project that comes along. And it's not like us having to go, all right, they did this there. Where's the information? Oh, it was never recorded. So you're having to start again. So, yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. Yes, I would have had a lot less sleepless nights, a lot less pressure if things were easier administratively. I understand why they weren't to a degree. So definitely, like, these projects are unique. They're just not like any other management intervention that I've been involved with. I mean, hopefully, I've alluded to the complexity of the project, and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
No, and you're right. This is combination of being unique and maybe being too cautious on some occasions, and that's what it's causing us. How did you end up dealing with those people who are fundamentally opposing? So you have to take the community on board, but there was no requirement that every single last one of them need to agree to it.
No, I think I just don't think you would ever get to a situation like that, and to have that as the marker for progressing to the next step. You would never get to the next step. So, in my view, look, what we did wasn't perfect. Could we have communicated more with those people and spent more time with them? Potentially. Probably, in fact. But because we were dragged in so many different directions, particularly myself, I didn't get the time to spend, having those conversations deep into the night with folk about the ethical issues. And I would say that's probably a failing of the project, because before we got on the ground, that stuff should have been happening before we got there. But it didn't. So when I arrived there, I had to start having those conversations. And that was probably a failing of the project. So lead-in time is important for these things, so you can have those conversations and address as many things as you can. But the way these projects are funded is problematic as well, because they are all short-term. They're like 3, 4, 5 year, because that's what the funders require. They don't want to fund something that lasts for 10 years. They want something that's sharp, and we'll get them the headlines. Oh, look, we're doing good. We're supporting this. We're doing this. Let's move on to the next thing. And that is an issue with these sort of projects. They do need longer term funding. Because I know since I left the project, more funding was sought, because it was, as I said, it was a very complex project, and the complexities grew as we moved into the rat eradication phase. So more money was needed. But yeah, it's a failing of the funding models for these sort of projects. Then, look, we know it's not unique to island eradications. A lot of conservation projects in Britain and Ireland are, say, funded by the EU LIFE, 5 years maximum, and then you can't fund the same project under the same funding model. You've got to come up with a different approach. That makes no sense.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Invasive species don't respect administrative desires.
And we talk on the podcast so many times about these issues with the funding, and like project is really looking at the effects over 20, 50, 100 years, and then you have, like you said, like a 5-year funding, and then you need to write the report, and it's like that's it.
Yeah.
Which also
exactly.
means that, like you mentioned, like the people who are dealing with the consequences of that needs to be taken into account. Are you going to come back to the island?
Yeah, so I've been going back to the island every 6 months to monitor the small mammal population on the island. So it's got wood mice and pygmy shrews. So they will be indirectly impacted by the rat eradication.
But that's a different
because
project,
of the poisons. Yeah. So like I'm now working at Ulster University, so it's part of a monitoring project that I'm trying to do, because again, there's very little information on what the impacts of these projects are on non-target species. So we don't know how long it takes for them to recover. Do they occupy parts of the island now the rats are gone? There's no competition because we're finding that the wood mice in particular, you wouldn't find them in coastal areas. Is that due to the rats? When the rats go, will the wood mice come back? And island populations of rodents are pretty cool as well. So the wood mice and pygmy shrews are much larger than the mainland wood mice and pygmy shrews. So you're talking like on the mainland, the pygmy shrew is about 1.5-2 grams, something like that. On the island, you're getting pygmy shrews that are 6, 7, 8 grams. So these are beasts.
Wow! So it's like it's counterintuitive, because I think that the island on the island, mammals are usually smaller than the mainland.
Yeah.
That's reptiles on the islands are bigger than the mainland. But you're saying that the small mammals also
so with rodents, it's seen that they get bigger on islands. So like, you've heard of your dwarf elephants on the Mediterranean islands and stuff like that. So the bigger animals get smaller, the smaller animals get bigger. So
I thought I heard that there was like a mammals and reptiles division, but this is like a body size.
With these, the rule doesn't quite fit with with everything. It's one of those, the more you dig, you're like, oh, that's a wee bit different as well. But yeah, with our wood mice and pygmy shrews, they're doing what the island rule suggests they should do. So yeah, like I'm going back. I was trying to get back this month, but just with commitments at the university now with teaching and stuff, I don't know if I'm going to get back until the new year. So
when you finally go back, what would you like to see compared to what you saw when you started the project? How the success looks like for you personally, outside of the report and paper and all that, but for you personally, how that?
For me personally, what I would really like to see is, yes, it would be great to see the recovery of the bird populations on the island. But what I would like to see is a better relationship between the organisations that are involved in the management of species and landscapes and the community there. Because when I went in, the organisations involved, so we're talking about government and the organisations that employed me, they didn't have a good relationship with the islanders, and that's because of a very detached approach to managing the land and making decisions there. The decisions were made off island, and people only generally found about them when they were being enacted on the island. So one of my big ambitions, that considering all the time and effort that me and many of the other members of the team have put into the project to make a better relationship with the islanders, that continues, because that is the only way, the island's going to remain rat free. It's going to remain ferret free. People are going to invest their time and effort in supporting the conservation of, say, the corncrake, which is a major focus of work on the island. Without that, then it's all going to be for nothing, really, in the long term, because there'll be a higher risk of people going, screw this, let's bring the ferrets back. So for me, that's the most important thing, the maintenance of relationships between the people and the organisations involved in the conservation of the species that we're all interested in. But I don't know if you've seen, there was a report, was it earlier this month, end of last month? So shearwaters have been recorded breeding on Rathlin now. So that's happened a lot sooner than we imagined, compared to, work that's been done elsewhere on islands around Britain. It's taken 10 plus years for these to come back. So this kind of confirms some things that we thought were happening on the island. We thought the shearwaters were trying to breed, but they weren't being successful because of the rats. So it looks like they've bred for the first time in goodness knows how long. So, I mean, that's an amazing outcome. I look forward to the day when Rathlin's got as many shearwaters as the Copeland Islands. some place like that. And I think that time will come, and that'll be exciting to see. But again, the big thing I would love to see is relationships between people improving to ensure the long-term success of projects like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are wise words, David. We said many times that in the conservation projects, probably a smaller part is the biology and ecology, and social sciences is the main bulk of that. Also, I think that that very last information that you share, we can officially on this podcast, for the listeners of this podcast, announce that the project was successful. So congratulations to you and your team, and thanks for your time and for sharing that information with us. Thank you.
That's all right. Thanks for having me.
Before you go, since you stick to the end of this show, then first and foremost, thank you so much for listening and for watching. And if you enjoy what I do here, and I presume you do since you listen to the very end, you should subscribe to my newsletter. The link is in the description of the show, newsletter.tommysoutdoors.com. So get in there and you will get notifications not only about the latest episodes of the podcast, but also about everything else that is happening in the conservation and science world.